not smart enough to join the CIA. At least, that's what members of the CIA would like you to think. Let's take a look at the level of stupidity a member of the CIA must possess in order to think that killing an innocent person would solve anything. Specifically, let's look at the case of Frank Olson. Frank Olson was a scientist and a member of the CIA. He worked on biological warfare projects, including those at the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories at Fort Detrick. Prior to his death, he was drugged by the CIA with LSD. After the drugging, he had his revelations and moral dilemmas. And then he didn't want to work for the CIA anymore. His colleagues made him go to New York to try and get him treated, and ultimately, he was found dead, and the official report currently is that it was an LSD-induced suicide. Frank Olson fell from the 13th floor from his room 1018A in Statler Hilton Hotel in New York. The minimum height for a floor in New York is 7 feet 6 inches. We can assume that the hotel followed this code, and therefore at the 13th floor at the minimum, Frank Olson fell from at least 97.5 feet. The medical examiner's report in 1953 had described lacerations on Olson's body. The 1994 autopsy revealed a previously undisclosed hematoma on Olson's temple. James Stars, the George Washington University forensic pathologist who examined the body, concluded that Olson had suffered a blow to the head before he fell from room 1018A. He called the evidence rankly and starkly suggestive of homicide. But the newer study found zero evidence of lacerations. A study found that on smaller falls than Frank's, abrasions were the most common type of injury to find on a victim, and bruises were rare. In the same study, 75.5% of the cases had head injuries. The hematoma injury found on Frank Olson is by definition a bruising. Although the location of the injury would be typical of a fatal fall victim, the type of injury is rare. In the autopsies, there was no evidence of lacerations on Frank Olson's body, which would be expected if he had jumped through glass and received cuts from that. This indicates that the narrative is false and that the window was broken beforehand, and then he either jumped or was thrown out. Lashbrook was CIA and also staying in the same room as Frank Olson at the time of his death. After the two had dined that evening and watched TV, Olson washed his socks in the sink and went to bed. At 2:25 a.m., Lashbrook awakened to a loud crash. He noticed that a window was broken and Olson was gone. Since we've deduced that Frank Olson did not jump out of an intact window, we can now conclude that Lashbrook is lying, since he would have seen Frank still there after the window was broken and then jump out. If Frank Olson truly did commit suicide, Lashbrook would have easily claimed that he heard glass break and then Frank jumped out. The evidence strongly suggests that he was aware of Frank's murder and lied to cement the narrative of Frank's suicide. However, he ultimately stabbed himself in the back. Ultimately, the totality of evidence for the fall suggests that Frank Olson's death was not a suicide, but likely a homicide by the hands of the CIA. The family was awarded $750,000 for the death of Frank Olson, and this was only half of what was recommended by the White House and the CIA. There was no substantial evidence to suggest that Frank Olson was suicidal, even after the CIA allegedly drugged him with LSD. If Frank Olson had indeed killed himself, a settlement would likely not have been necessary, as the CIA would not have had a reason to anticipate his suicide. assuming they were not responsible for his death. Therefore, the settlement strongly indicates that Frank Olson's death was not due to suicide, but rather suggests that it may have been the result of a homicide, most likely at the hands of the CIA. After Frank Olson's murder, no one in the CIA was held responsible. The CIA thinks that you can kill an innocent person for $750,000. If that's what they think, anyone can probably kill a guilty person for much, much less. From the totality of the evidence, Lashbrook was well aware of Frank Olson's murder and, at the time, could have been charged with obstruction of justice due to the fact that he was lying about what he saw. Additionally, it is highly likely that the CIA director at the time, Alan W. Dulles, would have either ordered Frank's execution from himself or the president, or approved of the execution from an inferior. You're not smart enough to join the CIA, at least that's what members of the CIA would like you to think. You have to be an idiot to join the CIA. You have to be an idiot to think that killing an innocent person is the answer to protecting national security.